Elizabeth Ann Roberts. For over 4 decades, her name was lost to time. Her face erased by age, her story buried under the title Precious Jane Doe. But once, long before anyone found her, Elizabeth was a 17-year-old girl full of youth and rebellion, trying to escape a home that never truly felt safe. It was 1977, and she was living in Washington state, caught between teenage innocence and the dangerous freedom of adulthood. She wanted more life, more adventure, more control over her own story. But one night, everything changed. Elizabeth disappeared. There were no grand farewells, no tearful goodbyes, just silence. Her family thought she'd run away, maybe to start over somewhere far from home. Police labeled her a runaway, as they did with so many girls in the 1970s, and the case quietly faded into the background. No flyers, no alerts, no trace. Months later, deep in a wooded area of Snohomish County, a hiker stumbled upon human remains. The body of a young woman, too young to have lived through what she did. Investigators found little to go on. No ID, no purse, no identifying jewelry. Just a body and a mystery. They called her Precious Jane Doe because even though no one knew her name, she was someone's child, someone's daughter, someone precious. Detectives followed every possible lead. They compared her face to missing persons reports, but the databases were limited, and technology was decades away from the tools we have now. The 1980s came and went. The 1990s too. The world changed, but she didn't. Her body rested in a cold evidence vault, her case file collecting dust while her real name waited, buried with her. For more than 40 years, she existed only as a mystery. Then, in 2020, something extraordinary happened. A small team of forensic genealogists reopened her case, determined to find out who Precious Jane Doe really was. They extracted a fragile DNA sample from her remains, a piece of her that time hadn't stolen, and ran it through a genealogy database. Bit by bit, names started to surface. Cousins, distant relatives, possible connections, and then a match. A faint thread that led back to a missing girl named Elizabeth Ann Roberts, last seen in 1977. When they showed Elizabeth's family the reconstructed face, the high cheekbones, the quiet sadness in the eyes, they knew. They had found her. It had taken 43 years, countless dead ends, and a single strand of DNA to bring her home. And yet, one question still lingered in every investigator's mind. What really happened to Elizabeth that night? Because finding her name was one thing, but uncovering the truth of how she died would expose a darker story still waiting to be told. After the identification of Precious Jane Doe as Elizabeth Ann Roberts, detectives felt the weight of both relief and dread. Relief, because after 4 decades, they finally knew who she was. Dread, because the moment they put a name to the face, her case shifted from a mystery to a murder. Elizabeth hadn't just disappeared, she had been taken, and what happened to her was brutal. The forensic team's analysis revealed trauma consistent with homicide. Her death hadn't been peaceful, it had been violent, deliberate, and hidden with care. Whoever did it didn't just want her gone, they wanted her forgotten. And for nearly half a century, they succeeded. Investigators began to reconstruct her life leading up to the night she vanished. Elizabeth was 17, restless, and caught in the middle of family tension. Her stepfather and mother had been struggling to keep her on a stable path. She had recently been seen with an older man, someone she trusted, maybe even loved, but who others said made her uneasy. When she stopped coming home, everyone assumed she'd finally run away for good. That assumption cost her justice for decades. By the time police realized she was never coming back, there was no evidence left to trace. Witnesses had moved on. Records were lost. Even the memory of her had faded from local consciousness. But DNA doesn't forget. The genealogical search that led to Elizabeth's name also led to new relatives, distant cousins who had submitted DNA for ancestry testing. Once they confirmed the match, the focus turned toward one pressing question: who could have killed her? Police re-examined files from the 1970s, pulling out cold cases from nearby counties that involved teenage girls who vanished under similar circumstances. A disturbing pattern emerged: young women disappearing, then later found dead, all with eerily similar signs of violence. One name began to surface: a known serial offender, active during that time in Washington and Oregon. His profile fit too perfectly to ignore. He preyed on vulnerable runaway girls, often offering rides or temporary shelter before turning deadly. He'd been convicted in other cases, but never connected to Elizabeth until now. Unfortunately, by 2020, he was already dead. Decades too late for questioning, too late for confession. The detectives couldn't charge a ghost, but the pattern, the timeline, and the evidence all pointed to him. The most likely explanation was that Elizabeth had fallen victim to one of the many predators who roamed the West Coast during the late 1970s. A man whose crimes stretched across states and who used society's indifference toward runaways as his cover. For the Roberts family, the confirmation brought a mix of closure and heartbreak. They had spent years wondering if she might still be alive somewhere, living under another name, maybe with children of her own. Instead, they learned that her story had ended in those woods decades ago. But this time, her name wouldn't be buried with her. She would no longer be precious Jane Doe. She would be Elizabeth Ann Roberts, remembered not as a mystery, but as a person, a daughter, a sister, and a life that mattered. Her case became another example of how forensic genealogy has transformed cold casework across America. How one strand of DNA can rewrite history, give back names, and bring long-awaited peace to families who have lived too long in the dark. And for the investigators who worked the case, Elizabeth's story wasn't just about solving a crime. It was about redemption, about restoring dignity to a young girl who had been silenced for 40 years. But the truth about what really happened that night? That part still lives between the trees of Snohomish County, where the forest remembers everything. When Elizabeth Ann Roberts' name was finally restored, the real work began. The forensic team wanted to know how such a small fragment of evidence, a degraded DNA sample buried for decades, could still speak so loudly after all that time. It took precision, luck, and technology that didn't exist when she vanished. In 2020, cold case specialists at the Snohomish County Medical Examiner's Office revisited her file. Among the evidence was a brittle envelope containing bone fragments carefully labeled from the late 1970s. The samples were sent to a specialized lab, where technicians worked for weeks, extracting what little DNA remained. Many attempts failed. The sample was old, the material fragile. But finally, after multiple extractions, a viable profile emerged, a whisper of genetic code that could still be read. That's when forensic genealogy entered the picture. Analysts uploaded the profile to a public DNA database, looking for any distant relatives who might share common markers. It didn't take long before a small cluster appeared, people living hundreds of miles apart, all tied together by strands of DNA leading back to one name, Roberts. One of the genealogists, who had worked on other Jane Doe identifications, later said she felt a chill when the name Elizabeth surfaced. "It's like she'd been waiting all this time for someone to say her name again," she said. From there, the team contacted relatives across the United States. They asked questions, shared composite sketches, and showed facial reconstructions created using forensic artistry. When one cousin saw the image, she paused. The eyes, the mouth, the curve of the chin, it was familiar. "That looks like Liz," she whispered. DNA confirmation soon made it official. The girl lost in the Washington woods was indeed Elizabeth Ann Roberts, missing since 1977. For her family, the news came like a storm. Her younger relatives had grown up hearing vague stories about an aunt who ran away and never came back. Some didn't even know she existed until investigators called. The older ones, those who remembered the search, the police visits, the unanswered phone calls, broke down when they heard the truth. After so many years of imagining every possible scenario, the waiting was over. Detectives arranged a small meeting at the sheriff's office, where they presented the final findings. There were no dramatic reveals, no big press conferences, just a quiet exchange of truth and tears. Elizabeth's surviving family was given the chance to reclaim her remains, to give her a resting place under her real name. They held a small memorial. No cameras, no media. Just family, flowers, and the sound of her name being spoken aloud again. Softly, as if afraid to break her peace. To them, this wasn't just about science. It was about restoration. About giving a lost soul the respect she deserved. For the investigators, it was another reminder of how technology had changed the landscape of justice. For every Jane or John Doe still lying unidentified, Elizabeth's story proved that no case is ever truly cold. Not anymore. Even as the case officially closed, her story continued to ripple outward. The forensic team used her success to advocate for more funding, more testing, more awareness for unidentified victims across the country. Elizabeth became part of a growing movement, a symbol of how the smallest fragment of truth, preserved long enough, can bring an entire life back into focus. But beneath the relief, there was still an ache. No one could ever tell her family what those final hours were like, or why she ended up where she did. That silence, like so many in true crime, is something time can never fully erase. And yet, she was no longer forgotten, no longer precious Jane Doe. She was Elizabeth, found, named, and remembered. Elizabeth Ann Roberts' identification did more than close a file. It reignited hope in cold case units across the country. Her story became proof that time doesn't erase truth, not when science keeps advancing and people refuse to give up. After her case went public, other jurisdictions began reopening their own unidentified remains files. Detectives saw what was possible, that even after 40 years, one bone fragment could still reveal a name, a family, and a story. The Snohomish County team shared their methods with departments in Oregon, Idaho, and California, sparking a wave of similar DNA re-examinations. Within a year, several other Jane Does were identified using the same genealogical process that brought Elizabeth home. Her case showed how far cold casework had come, from handwritten reports and sketches in the 1970s to digital DNA profiles that could trace entire family trees. What once took decades of luck could now be achieved with science and persistence. For investigators, Elizabeth's name became a symbol of purpose. Many of them admitted that solving cases like hers gave meaning to years of quiet work that often went unnoticed. They'd spent entire careers chasing shadows, but Elizabeth's story proved that those shadows could still speak. Her identification also changed how the public saw missing persons. In the 1970s, girls like Elizabeth were often dismissed as runaways. Their disappearances were ignored. their cases rarely investigated properly. Decades later, her discovery served as a reminder of how dangerous that assumption had been, and how many other lives were lost to the same neglect. For the Roberts family, the aftermath was bittersweet. They finally had closure, but closure doesn't mean peace. They visited the site where she'd been found, a quiet patch of forest now overgrown and silent. It wasn't about finding answers anymore. It was about giving her presence back to the world, making sure people remembered her, not for how she died, but for the fact that she lived. Elizabeth's case was later featured in forensic journals and true crime documentaries as a benchmark for cold case success. Her story became an example for how collaboration between law enforcement, genealogists, and families could bring long-forgotten victims home. In quiet offices across the country, other investigators kept her photo pinned to their boards, not as a reminder of tragedy, but as a promise that no victim would remain nameless forever. Elizabeth didn't get justice in the traditional sense. Her killer was gone before his crimes caught up with him, but she got something he never expected her to have: her identity. And in the world of cold cases, that's where justice begins. Even after death, she managed to change lives, to shift the way investigators approached every unknown victim who came after her. Her story became a legacy, one that turned a forgotten tragedy into a spark that reignited hope for countless other families still waiting for answers. And though her name was silent for 43 years, it now stands as a reminder to the world that time might bury evidence, but truth has a way of resurfacing. Elizabeth Ann Roberts' story ends the way so many never do, with her name spoken again. After more than 4 decades of silence, the world finally knew who she was. Her identity was no longer a mystery file in a drawer or a faded sketch in an evidence binder. She was human again, and that simple truth meant everything. When her family visited her gravesite under her real name, they didn't cry for the girl who vanished. They cried for the years lost, the birthdays, the laughter, the moments stolen by someone who thought he could make her disappear. But time didn't erase her. It just waited for science to catch up. For investigators, her case wasn't just about closing a cold file. It was about rewriting what justice means. Elizabeth's identification showed that no one is too forgotten, no story too old, and no life too small to matter. Because every missing person, every Jane or John Doe, has a name. And finding that name is the first step toward peace. Her story traveled beyond Washington. True crime communities, genealogists, and families of the missing began sharing her case online. They talked about her as if they knew her, because in a way, they did. She represented every soul who vanished without a trace, every family still searching for answers. Today, her legacy lives not through her death, but through the countless other identifications that followed. Her case proved that persistence pays off, that technology can give a voice to the voiceless, and that empathy can do what even time couldn't: bring the forgotten home. And now, her story has reached you. If you've made it this far, remember this: every share, every comment, every moment spent keeping their stories alive helps ensure that no one else fades into silence. So if Elizabeth's journey moved you, if you believe every missing person deserves to be found, take a moment, right now. Like this video, share her name, and subscribe for more stories that give the lost their voices back. Because somewhere out there, another family is still waiting to hear the same words that brought Elizabeth home. We found her.